Hi, my name is Ken. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi.
Let's all get up and walk. I like that. I like to see people moving. I hate to see people sitting down just looking like that. So if you have to do anything, or you know anybody has to do anything, go and do it. You know, don't sit around. Okay. I like it. Looks like a bomb scare. This is the way it used to be when I used to go into bars. You know, here he comes again. You know. It's nice to be here. I want to thank Walt, Mike, and all the folks who were involved in making a very critical decision to bring me here. So far, it's been real nice. I've had a chance to meet all the folks and enjoy your weather. And it's a funny kind of air you have up here coming from Southern California. You don't have to chew it. And that's always nice. I usually have a tremendous advantage when I speak far away from home, and that is the fact that some of the things I remember most vividly never happened. And, oh, you guys know that too, huh? Okay. But unfortunately or fortunately, there are several people here from San Diego, so they already know this stuff, so I've lost that advantage. You know, I was born and raised in Brooklyn, and it was, I came from a family of 7. Actually, it was 5, and my mom adopted 2. And in my family, we're divided into 2 groups. Either you're in AA or you need it. You know, there's no middle ground. And I lived in one of those neighborhoods where people would say, "How far is it to the subway?" And we'd shrug our shoulders and say, "We don't know. No one's ever made it." Mother was only half a word in my neighborhood, you know, like you knew there was more to come. More would be revealed. I like getting a chance to get out and see different parts of the country and get a chance to share and be involved with people in AA. I just love AA. This Thursday, July the 5th, I'll be sober 20 years. And when I first got here, I didn't know if I wanted what you guys had. I just knew I didn't want what I had. And one of the things that happens when you speak to large groups and get a chance to share at a group level is the fact that everybody hears differently. I'm always impressed with that, because after you're done sharing, people will come up and they'll credit you with saying things you never said, and then they'll tell you how much it meant to them. And I like that part, because being alcoholic, I like getting credit for something I never did. And but the flip side of that is sometimes somebody will come up and they'll credit you with saying something you never said, and on top of that, they disagree with it. And, you know, it reminds me of the kid who was 10 years old, and he came out from New York to California, and words always have different meanings in different places. And the kid was visiting his cousin in California, and the kid from California was 10 years old also. So the kid from California said to his cousin from New York, "Shh, guess what I found today?" And his cousin said, "What?" He said, "I found a condom on the patio." And the kid from New York said, "What the hell's a patio?" You know. And you know, that's the way we hear things. I say one thing, you hear another thing. No wonder there's all kinds of confusion. You know, it's that way. It reminds me of that gal who has passed away now, who used to be on Saturday Night Live, Emily, and play Emily Latella. And she used to say things like, "How come you're so excited about fleet erections in South America?" And they'd say, "No, Emily, that's free elections." And she'd go, "Oh, never mind." You know, that's the way I feel sometimes, because it's like, sometimes I'm talking to newcomers and it feels like you're having a dialogue with the deaf. You know, and you wonder, well, you know, what's going on here? Is anything going on? And so anyway, I started to tell you, and my story, I was listening to Judy's story, because my story is very different. She said how her first husband proposed in front of a large group at a summer camp, I guess was where it happened. And you know, I grew up in Brooklyn, and in my neighborhood, if you weren't married by the time you were 12 or 13, they thought you were shaky. And the way most of us proposed were with 2 words. You're what? You know, It was very romantic. Yeah. That was during the era when safe sex meant lock the door. But things have a whole different meaning today. I go to meetings and I hear words that, just weren't around when I got sober. Dysfunctional and this and that and the other thing. When I came in and I would say things like that, they used to tell me they were character defects. Now they're a whole other deal. And I think that's okay if you need them. But it's like, I have a lot of guys that I have the opportunity to work with. And some of them get stalled at a particular problem in life. They just get there and they don't do anything with it. As they say, they're going to change it. That means we're going to write about it. We're going to inventory it. We're going to share it at a lot of meetings. We're going to call you on the phone regularly, Ken. We're going to do everything but take action. Okay? And I have a phrase for this. I call it milking a mouse, And you don't get very good results. You just... And some people get caught at that speed bump and they're there for 30 years, And it's like we just don't know how to let go in AA. It takes a long time to let go of things. And you have to learn that. You have to basically learn how to let go. And it's like you watch people and they're in something that's really bad for them. And it's like they get thrown from a horse and they grab hold of the stirrup. And as they're hanging onto the stirrup, the horse is circling the Kmart parking lot, hitting every piece of gravel that's there. And all of their friends are yelling, "Let go! Let go!" And they say things like, "Who, me?" And instead of letting go, they're trying to figure out how to enjoy the ride, And so one of the things that I do, it's almost heresy anymore in Alcoholics Anonymous, is if I'm going to work with you, we use the big book. I mean, is that amazing or what? And you guys have one hell of a big book here. We were kidding before, that could fall on me and hit me in the head. I'd be laying out there and they open it up and say, "Oh, it was killed by a vision for Ken, Great. But the big book says it all because it says things in real clear English, which folks have trouble reading. Did you ever notice that? I mean, like, there are lines that say, "Some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the results were nil until we let go. Absolutely." Well, let's read that again because that's really breathtaking. Some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the results were nil until we let go. Absolutely. Well, what does that mean, Ken, that I can keep some stuff and get rid of... No, let's read it one more time. I know the wording is somewhat confusing. Let go of all our old ideas, and it's like, well, let me take that home and study it, In the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, of which I have a copy, there is a chapter called "There is a Solution." Some of you may have read it. It's the theme of the convention this weekend. And the deal is in there it says, if the alcoholic does not drink, he tends to act much like other men. Therefore, the main problem of the alcoholic rests in his mind, rather than in his body. Okay? That's why the 3 words you never want to hear an alcoholic say is, "I've been thinking," It should scare you. It should petrify you. Particularly if they had a lot of time to do it, Because alcoholics are equipped with this mechanism that can take any solution and turn it into a problem, Any solution, We go to a wedding, we want to be the bride. We go to a funeral, we want to be the corpse. And we want to do it humbly, you know. We scratch shit that just don't itch, you know. And we push everybody out of the way to get to the front of the line, and we find out it's a spot between a dog and a hydrant. You know, like... And heaven forbid we should ever have a thought in the now, you know. Well, I want to talk about when I was a child and when I retire, my pension plan. Well, you're 40, you know, you're kind of like midway away from childhood and not quite at retirement yet. But that's where most of us do our thinking. We do it in the future or in the past. To get an alcoholic, including myself or anyone else, to concentrate on the present is scary. We always want to reflect. There is nothing to reflect. I don't want to scare you tonight if you're sitting here, but you've already had your best yesterday. You will never have another one. Trust me. I've been here. I read the book. You're not going to have another yesterday. And you're not going to be able to say in 20 years, this is what you're going to do. So we always have trouble with staying in the now. That's why if you take now and you spell it backwards, it's one. People who can live in the now all the time have won. That's where life is played out. It's played out in the now. Eternity is now. Everything is now. We can think in any dimension, only act now, you know? However, if you don't like the now, it's like the alcoholic who was in Las Vegas. And he met this beautiful woman, and he said he'd like to spend the night with her. And she said, absolutely not. And he said, I'll give you $10,000. And within moments, they were upstairs on the bed nude, and she said, kiss me on the lips. And he did, and he said, I don't know. She said, well, then kiss me on the neck. And he did, and he said, oh, I don't know. Finally, she said, kiss me on the breast. And he did, and he said, oh, I don't know. She said, what don't you know? He said, I don't know where I'm going to get the 10 grand. See, that's an alcoholic problem, you know. You're right in the middle of a good thing and you're projecting out, you know. And alcoholics and Al-Anons overlap in certain areas, and that is, we feel guilty about things we never had anything to do with. It's like Mr. Mouse was out cruising the bars one night, and he picks up Miss Elephant. And he takes her home, and they make passionate love all night long. And in the morning when Mr. Mouse wakes up, he rubs his eyes and he looks over, and there's Miss Elephant. She's on her back, her feet are in the air, she's dead as a doornail. And he goes, wow, one night of fun and I spend the rest of my life digging a grave. You know, like, you know. You know, if you didn't have anything to do with it, leave it alone. You know, like, don't take credit for stuff you didn't have anything to do with. And people perpetually do that. And that's why it's real important here, and if you can step back far enough, and time will allow you to do this, you will come to the realization that everything you thought was the problem when you first came into this room was never the problem to begin with. The problem to all your life's problems is sitting in your seat. And will probably be with you every single day as long as you live. So get used to that person. And the reality is that most folks have trouble in getting sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, at least from my observation and experience, because they have trouble with the simplicity of the program. It is so simple, they miss it. They're too busy thinking. I don't want to scare anyone, but this is heavy stuff. It's the most important thing maybe I'll say tonight. And that is, thinking accomplishes absolutely nothing. That's why we have a chapter, Into Action. It doesn't say into thinking, into analyzing, into evaluating, into equating. No, it's into action. Ken, I don't know if I can be sincere in doing those steps. Don't be sincere, just be thorough. I don't care what your attitude is, just do them. And the reality is that in doing the steps, all of the steps, in order, what happens is you are formulating those relationships that will carry you through your entire life. Period. The first 3 steps will get you right with God. You and God form a loving relationship. Steps 4, 5, 6, and 7 will get you right with you. You get rid of all the wreckage of the past, all of the wreckage of the past, all of the wreckage of the past, along with all your old ideas, and then you go to steps 8 and 9, which gets you right with the rest of the world. And then you move on to steps 10, 11, and 12 that are maintenance steps that help you solidify and keep those firm relationships you have formed in those earlier steps. And it's just that simple. Don't wake up in the morning trying to figure out what you are to become. You are everything you're ever going to become. Get up in the morning and get in action. People tell me, well, Ken, I may make a mistake. We're counting on it. That's what life is. It's a space in which to go and experience. And most folks are so afraid of it, they don't participate in it. They think it's something you're fearful of until you die. And that's a real tough way to live, folks. Waiting about, whoa, I hope I don't die. I'm scared to live, but I hope I don't die. And we're just hanging out, sucking up oxygen. And when you say to someone, do you read the newspapers? I mean, what could possibly go wrong? I mean, everybody who can do anything has already done it. The air we breathe is like polluted. The water we drink is polluted. The food is full of carcinogens. I'm from New York. Any day a 5,000-pound fish with one eye is going to come out of the Hudson River and say, I want to see somebody from Dow Chemical right now. That's going to be the attitude. I'm reading this morning where a man couldn't pay his bills. He's in debt for $155 million. He can't pay his bills. So what do? They lend him more money. I mean, the 2 things that people are looking for in the world are non-existent. They're looking for logic and they're looking for security. And neither one exists. The intrinsic value of this life is its insecurity. And everything is illogical. I mean, I watch TV, I can't figure stuff out. It shows a guy, if they want to advertise like hair shampoo, it shows a guy shampooing his hair. That makes sense to me. Toothpaste, a guy brushing his teeth. Makes sense to me. They do a tampon ad and there's 2 women playing tennis. I don't understand half of this stuff. In the store, they have things like mint-flavored dog biscuits. Hey, if I want my dog to have good breath, I'll put Levoris in the toilet. So this is the world I'm launched into. I mean, I started drinking because I could look, even as a youngster, and see that there was something radically wrong in the world, as I could perceive it at that time. And I just had poor perception because that's what I was focused on. Everybody in my neighborhood who had money was called Don. It's just that way, And they used to say things like, hey, he fell asleep in the trunk of a car, he deserved to be shot. That's the way it is. And the reality is that in growing up, what happened to me, and I'm more and more convinced of it, and the big book talks to me about it, is that I was sent out from the home office okay. There was absolutely nothing wrong with me. But along the way, people who were trying to help me, well-intentioned people, molded me and moved me in such ways that my perception of life got totally distorted. Just period. There's no one particular person to blame. A lot of people played a role, and they didn't know any better because that's the way they had been taught. It wasn't like good guys and bad guys. They didn't know any better. And then I was one of those guys, I got through school totally unscarred by education, you know. Wherever they had some of that stuff going on, I try to hang out someplace else, you know, just be someplace else. And thank God you don't need a lot of education to get sober and stay sober and to be happy, joyous, and free. In fact, in most cases, it gets in the way. Because you're thinking. I mean, most of the guys I grew up with and got sober with still think that Moby Dick is a venereal disease. You know, they don't know. That's just the way it is. Teacher asked a buddy of mine, how do you spell Mississippi? He said, you mean the river of the state? You know, that's those kind of guys. Deep meaning. And so what happened to me was that about 13 or 14, my dad passed away, and my mom, who had very minimal education, was left with a bunch of kids. And she was doing her very best to raise them. And I knew how I could make money. And I could make money by running book. And so I started to run book. And in addition to going to school, I ran book in the streets. And I made money. And with that money, we bought groceries. It was a very simple process. And I learned that there was a different philosophy in the streets than they were teaching in school. In the streets, they used to say, go and get a lot of experience. That's why this program appealed to me so much in the early days. And it still does. But it was, go get your own experience. Because in the street, they used to say, go get experience rather than go get education. Because when a man with experience meets a man with money, the guy with the experience will end up with the money, and the guy who had the money will end up with an experience, you know? So go and get experience. And as you are here, the best visualization that I can give you is that I was going down this road of life, and I'll relate it to something I'm familiar with, which was a station wagon. I had a station wagon. Big Bel Air station wagon, Chevy Bel Air station wagon. And it was like, as I was going down the highway of life, I was taking the garbage of my life and I was throwing it in the back of the station wagon. And when I got to AA, it was like hitting the brakes. All this stuff that I had thrown in the back of this station wagon began to hit off the window and hit me in the back of the head and come in at me at all sides. And so I perceived that that was the problem. And it was, because it was the most obvious. But after I was here several years, I came to the realization for me that the problem was the driver. That stuff was just the result of the guy who was sitting behind the wheel. I had lived my life in such a way that I had, if someone asked me what was wrong with me when I first got here, I would say, I'm a little different. I mean, I'd go into a bar and it's like I could almost hear a drum roll, you know, here's Ken, you know, because I would do the wackiest things. And people used to say, oh, good, it's going to be fun. I was going to go home, but here comes Ken. I mean, you know, like peeing in somebody's steam iron, that kind of stuff. You know, just because they yanked you around a little bit. You know, I did the kind of things, and people would look at me and say, why did you do that? When I was small, people would look at me, well-intentioned, well-meaning, well-informed people would look at me and say, why did you do that? And I would have no answer. But rather than look stupid, I would make one up. And when I was older, there were judges in my life who said, why did you do this? And the same thing was applicable at that time. I had no idea why I had done it, so I would just make stuff up. I remember one night saying to a guy in a lockup, how do you know if you're an alcoholic? And he said, it's real simple. He said, see that light? It says visitor? I said, yeah. He said, when that goes out, some of these people go home, but me and you, we stay. And I pondered that. It was one of those heavy statements you hear that you just have to think about, you know. And when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm real happy that at the first meeting I went to, they gave me a copy of the big book. And I went home and I opened that book and I started to read it. And the thing that became painfully obvious to me was that for the first time in my life, I now had an owner's manual. You know, I never had an owner's manual before. Now I had an owner's manual because I had always thought as a kid, even growing up in the streets, that someday, somehow, I would live my life in such a way that someone would write a book about me. And they did. The big book of Alcoholics Anonymous talks about drunks. And I could see that what they were saying was so very simple if I didn't complicate it. I mean, the steps were really laid out simple. I had to learn things like there is no there or then. You guys may be able to not recognize this right now, but there is no there or then. There's only here and now. And what I noticed about makeups of meetings like this is that there were two groups of people in AA. And my sponsor used to tell me about them. He said, there are those who do the work and those that take the credit. And he used to say, get in the first group, there's a lot less competition. And what I noticed is that the guys who came and set up the chairs and made the coffee and read the book just didn't seem to be going out, in and out the door. It was the guys who were aloof to that, who were here to inform us where we were missing and lacking. And they would be students of past lives. And they never seemed to stay sober. And if they were sober, they sure as hell weren't happy, joyous, and free. I used to watch them take cakes, and they would say things like, I'm an alcoholic, and that's my cake. And I'm happy to be sober. And he used to say, boy, if you're happy, tell your face, you know? I used to figure some of those guys missed their calling. They should have been hemorrhoids, you know? Oh, ugly. And I noticed that recovery was perception. I heard people say things like, I'm 5 years sober and tonight I have to sleep in my car. And be very, very upset about that. And there'd been some newcomer sitting next to me and he'd say, wish I had a car, you know? And it came to me that that's what life is. It's our perception of it. And I was wondering, how do you go about getting the right perception of life? And a guy told me the secret. And that's the secret I'll pass on to you and spend some time talking about. And that is getting out of your head and into your heart. Because everything of value in my life today emanates from my heart. God, love, family, commitment, neighborhood, friends, that stuff is in my heart. The only time I have trouble with any of that is if I process it through my head. And I learned that there's two laws of economics. There's a financial law of economics which most of us understand, and that is if you have $1 and you give it away, you're short $1. Am I going too fast? Okay. And then there's the economics of the heart. That the more you give away and the more you work with others, the more you seem to have in all areas of your life without really understanding 100% how it comes about. It's like the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes. It multiplies as you give it away. And you start out using it hopefully right off the bat in your home. And then it kind of transcends into the job. And then it transcends into the neighborhood. Then it gets so you're practicing these principles in all your affairs. And when you meet folks, you don't break it down into an adversarial position. I thought for the longest time, in all honesty, this is a belief I had, that if you disagreed with me, we were adversaries. You were on this side and I was on that side. It took me a long time to realize that you and I weren't the problem was the problem. So what we had to do, and I had to work at this, is winning people to come over onto my side. Not change their opinion or thinking, but come over on my side. And together we work on the problem before we become the problem and spend all our time in that situation. And that takes time. That takes a lot of time. And allowing people to be just who they are took me a lot of time. Judy mentioned it in terms of trying to change other people. It's a real bitch in the morning to start out saying, I am powerless, there's absolutely nothing I can do about anything. Hey, have a good day, let's go get them. Yeah. Oh yeah, I'm a real stickler for that stuff, yeah. And I hear people say things like they're afraid to get up. And I know only action. So when I get up in the morning, I read a book one time and it said 98% of the people who died in this country died laying down. So when my alarm goes off in the morning, I get up, I don't lay in bed and think about it. I figure, hey, he made a mistake, let him live with it, I get up. And as soon as I'm up, I want to go screw something up because I don't want to lose my skills, And I sleep in the buff, no big deal. But when I get up in the morning, the first thing I do every morning is I take out a little jumping net that I have, trampoline, it's by my bed, and I put it on the floor, and I stand in front of a full-length mirror that's in my house, and I put on the theme from Rocky. I told this story in Greeley, Colorado 2 years ago, and now I have a Stetson cowboy hat I wear. And I jump up and down on that trampoline on da-da-da, I'm happy to be alive. A lot of people didn't make it that morning. A lot of people are dead at 40. They just don't bury them. You know what I mean? They have a long post-mortem. And then they bury them at 65 or 70 or 75. But they're not doing anything. And when you suggest that they come and join you and live and try to enjoy some things, it's like, I can't, because today I have to. Because if I let too many days go by where I may forget what it's all about. Then I'd have to do something which is real scary, and that is participate in the now. When I first came here, someone gave me a Bible. I'm not advocating any religion, but I read that. And there was a passage in there that just jumped out at me, and it said, "Be still and know that I am God." And for this alcoholic, being still is a death-defying act. It's always like, let's go get it, And to just be still and allow life to evolve and not be in there trying to wheel and deal it was a real tough thing for me. I felt if I left it alone too long, I would no longer be able to get back into it. And thank God that's exactly what happened. In reading the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, for me, certain passages jumped out, and it led me to believe that getting out of your head was clearly the thing to do. That truth does not come on the installment plan. Truth comes all at once. One moment you're in darkness, and the next moment, boom, you're in truth. And you know it's your truth because you've experienced it. No one has to tell you about it. Each of these guys up here experienced their own spiritual awakening. Bill did it in one way, Bob did it in another. But they both talk about it in the same sense, that it was an inner revolution and that they tapped an inner resource. And in step 10, it talks about if you have done that step correctly, you will develop a sixth sense, and you will begin to feel his presence come into your life. And the sixth sense means you don't have to see it, touch it, smell it, feel it, or taste it. You just begin to know stuff without everyone or anyone ever telling you. And you become more and more relaxed with life because you're not trying to become anything. You're just enjoying who you are and participating in the moment. And as you do that more and more, you begin to understand that most of the stuff that I was fearful of was non-existent. I don't know where that fear came from that I had as a child. I don't know where it emanated, but I know, like the book says, it was an evil and corroding thread in my life. It shot my fabric through, and it caused me to miss out on a lot of things because I was afraid to take the step that would allow me to try something new. I would rather feel bad and look good than look bad and feel good. You know what I mean? And I would do that over and over and over again. You know, I just didn't know how to step out. And one of the best acronyms for faith that I've ever heard is Further Adventures in Trusting Him. And that's what my faith is today. It's like, God, I have proven to myself beyond a shadow of a doubt that when it comes to the real life things, my brain doesn't do diddle. I mean, I know how to make change at the Kmart, but I don't know how to deal with life. So what I have to do is let go and let God. And the book promises me things like I will intuitively know how to handle situations that used to baffle me. Well, I'm being unscarred by education. I looked up that word intuitive. It means to bypass the thought process. When Bambi sees a hunter in the wood, Bambi doesn't say, I wonder if he has a gun. I wonder if it's hunting season. Bambi boogies. That's intuitive thinking. And the deal is he gets out of there. And the next thing is we will suddenly realize God does not come in an orderly way. God comes, boom, all at once. It's a quantum leap. You didn't know, now you know. You didn't understand, now you understand. You feel it. It's a feeling versus anything else. I read a couple of months ago a great poem, and it kind of got me thinking about this. And what it said was, it was by Robert Frost, and it said, the woods are lovely, dark, and deep, and I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. And to me, that became the inward journey. See, I do have miles to go. I've just begun to touch on this stuff. It's brand new to me. And as I go into it more and more, not getting myself under a microscope, but allowing me to be gutted open and allowing myself to accept me just the way I am, recognizing that I'm one of God's kids and that God doesn't make junk, and that through me God is trying to become something He's never been before. And most of my life I impeded that. I held God back, and you have the right to do that. God is too much of a gentleman to come into a life where He's not invited. So He stands at the door and just says, I'm here. When you're ready, I'm here. And it's like, oh no, let me go to Family Fitness because I got to lose weight. Oh, let me stop smoking. That's my big priority now. Stop smoking. Yep, sir, going to work on that. Let me get into jogging. I'll jog 30, 40 miles a day. You know, I'll do anything but stand still and face the reality that there is one who has all power and can solve all of my problems. And that one is God, and He's ever present, ever available to do just that. And that as long as I have an answer, He can't come in. You know, when I hear people say, well, Ken, I'm going to try this one more thing, I'm going to try one more thing, I'm going to try one more. As long as you have one more thing to try, you're still stuck with the problem. Did you ever have that time in your life where you just are so overwhelmed by it that you do the thing that they suggest to do first, but you do it last? And you say, that's it, I give up. Bing! Like, field goal, it's good! You know, like... And then you feel totally relaxed. You say, why the hell did I wait 17 years to do that? But it's when you have an answer, It's wrong. And you say, but I'm a college graduate. We know that. That's why we saved you a chair. And it gets to the point where one of the biggest realizations, you see, I have that kind of mind that I was talking about earlier. I have the kind of mind that if I'm in a hole, my mind says, keep digging, you know? You need more action, keep digging, you know? And I do that all the time. And it's like this thing, fear. Fear corroded my life for the longest time. And if you ask me what I was afraid of, it would be all kinds of stuff because I didn't know what it was. And what it was life. I was afraid of life. Somehow I thought life was going to kill me. And it will. I remember I had a nice, gentle guy who sponsors me. I met him at my first meeting. He's still my sponsor. In fact, I was back in New York and gave him a 27-year cake in March. And I used to call him up because at that time when I first got here, my wife and kids had moved out of state because they thought I was a little crazy, and they were right. I was in the process of going to jail because I had a habit of finding things before people officially lost them. You know, I had all the poise of a dog on the freeway. You know, I had that look in my eye. And I would call my sponsor and tell him about my feelings, which were important. And I would call him at 10:30 or 11, so I knew I'd get him. And I would tell him just where I was. And he would say gentle things like, hey, maybe you'll get lucky and die, and hang up. And then he probably went to bed, and I would, till the wee hours of the morning until I passed out. But I kept going to these meetings not knowing what I was looking for. We used to get picked up by my sponsor who had one of those station wagons where people could look out the back and people look forward, and you know, you got about 10 people in the thing. I guess vans have replaced them today. And we'd have 10 guys in there, and we'd be going to a meeting, and the conversations would be very confusing. A guy would be saying, well, I'm quitting my job. That's the worst job I ever had. I'm quitting that job. I'm leaving tomorrow. I'm going in there. I'm going to quit that job. Another guy would be saying, well, I need a job. You know, you might as well get out and look at your job. And one guy would be saying, you know, if my wife Mary leaves, I can't stay sober. I just can't stay sober. If Mary leaves, I can't stay sober. Another guy would be saying, if that bitch stays, I'm done. I just no way. I'm just gonna do it. One guy would be cursing. Another guy would be saying, I think there's too much profanity up you. They'd be. I mean, this was the whole deal. And going to the meeting and coming home. And then there were conversations about run the light, hey, run the light, make the left, run the light. Oh, now we got to wait a minute. You know, now we got to, And I used to sit in the back and say, I understand this. You know, I understood this. This was total insanity, and I could accept that. But we didn't drink. And that became the deal. I started to notice that weeks had passed and I hadn't drank. Then it was months. Then they gave me this little tie tack. And on the tie tack, it was a triangle. And at the top was G, and on the side was AA. And in the middle was a dot. And they used to always say the same thing. This is a triangle of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's God at the top, and Alcoholics Anonymous on the side, and you're the dot in the middle. And if you have one hand in God and one hand in Alcoholics Anonymous, you don't have any hands to pick up a drink. And they'd give you the tie tack. And it would be like, wow, now I had this tie tack. Very valuable. 14, 18 cents. But it was my tie tack. And I remember going home and laying down in bed. And the thing that became very obvious to me was, it wasn't like things were going to be okay. Things were okay in my life. Things had settled down. I hadn't drank. I had some stuff was going to have to face, but it was all faceable, it seemed. And things began to happen. What do you hear in quotes? People say, miracle. I on them in AA, if you didn't have miracles, this would be we'd have to close. But I had a guy I met at a meeting, and I asked him to be my sponsor first. And he said, I would like to be, but I don't have enough sobriety. I'm only here a couple of months ahead of you. And so he begged off on it. But we went to meetings together because he had a car and I didn't. And we went to a lot of meetings. And 7-8 months into this deal, I had to go before the grand jury. The grand jury had come back and indicted me on something, and I had to go for a preliminary hearing to a district attorney's office. Now I'm talking about the greater metropolitan area of New York. There's 20 million people between Connecticut, Philadelphia, New York, and northern New Jersey. So I went in to see the district attorney, and who's sitting there but the guy that I was going to meetings with? I mean, that's not real impossible. 20 million people, I was pretty much on target. And he had a bunch of papers in front of him, and he looked and he said, Ken, I didn't know you did this. And I said, when I was riding with you and sharing, I sure didn't know you did this. That was not my idea. And the deal was, and instead of taking a fall on that and going back to the sneezer, we worked out a financial arrangement, and the policeman who was involved in handling it was a guy I went to high school with and played football with. And he co-signed a note. And the deal was, at 10 years sober, I paid that stuff off. And there were nights and months I used to call my sponsor and say, maybe I ought to just go belly up and walk away from this stuff. And he said, sure, any good loser would do that. You have a right to do that, break all your commitments to the people who counted on you. You have that right. You have the right not to live up to what you said you were going to do. You have the right. But somehow he didn't sound sincere. And so I did what I said I would do, and that started a trend line of doing things and completing things long after I lost interest in doing things and completing things. And he calls that character. He says character is doing it when you know it's right, long after you've lost the interest to do it. And so I started to do these things. And you know what happened? My wife, who was living away, decided I wasn't such a bad guy, and her and my kids came back. And I didn't go to jail, and I got a job. I mean, this was the tough part, changing my career. But I don't know, if you guys ever had jobs, like they want you there all the time, and it's usually like Monday through Friday, every day, and it's like no 4-hour lunch and none of that stuff. And so I started going to a job, and I started doing the basic things, and I stayed sober. And I started to read with diligence page 132 and 133 of the big book, where it talks about we absolutely insist on enjoying life. And we know that God wants us to be happy, joyous, and free. And we have recovered, and we've been given the power to help others. And if something comes our way, we make use of it. We don't run away from it. I hear all kinds of acronyms for fear. The one I like is face everything and recover. You stand up to it. You don't run away somewhere. And you start to do that. And the next thing you know is you're developing habits you never had before. And I don't know about you guys, but I had the capacity to tell myself the same story over and over and over again to the point where I believed it. It was like the lion, the lion is the king of the jungle, and he went up to the tiger one time and he said, who's the king of the jungle? And the tiger said, you're the king of the jungle, Mr. Lion. He said, don't you forget it. Then he went to the panther and he said, who's the king of the jungle? And the panther said, you, Mr. Lion. He said, don't you forget it. Finally, he went to the elephant. He said, who's the king of the jungle? And the elephant picked him up by the tail, spun him over his head, threw him 50 yards, banged him off a tree, walked over and stepped on him. and walked away. And the lion got up and fixed himself, sartorially, and said, hey, just because you don't know the right answer, that's no way to behave, you know? And that's what we do. We tell ourselves the same story. If you read pages 12 and 13 of Bill's story, you will see the key word to this whole program. It says, became willing. Okay? It says, complete willingness, humble willingness, entire willingness, enough willingness, became willing. So, being quick of mind, I began to suspect that played a role in this, you know, like, and then when it talks about the spiritual experience, it says we need what? Willingness. And that's really what the key is here. Getting yourself to a position to say, I don't know anything, I never did know anything, and based on that, I'm going to live a good life. And everything that happened in the past that I thought was negative, I'm going to use those as assets and bring that in as my own little deal where I'm going to learn not to do that stuff over and over and over and over again. And I'm going to grow up. Tough job, tough job. I'm going to grow up. And the big thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to become responsible for me. I'm going to let everybody who ever had anything to do with causing me harm in my life off the hook. And when I let them off the hook, I get off the hook. It's a two-way street. It's like having a tug of war. It's real hard to have a tug of war if the other guy won't hold his end. There's no tension. So you let go, and in letting go, it gets real simple. I had a chance in 1981, not by design, to go through a divorce. And I got custody of my kids. And I learned about loving and letting go at the same time. And I remember calling my sponsor, the sensitive warm man, and saying to him, here's where I'm at, this is what's going on. And he said, Ken, I don't know a whole lot that I can tell you, but I'll tell you one thing for sure. When this is all over, you're going to get custody of you. So you want to be the best person you can be. So your job is to facilitate to the best of your ability your family doing what they have to do at this point in time. And you know, that was a real big thing for me. And so we went through that. And in 1983, I had a little business that was going nowhere, and I had been at it for a while. And I just decided around 81, when this divorce thing happened, I'm going to let go of this business, and I'm going to go and just work entirely in the field of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, I don't mean just go and work as a paid employee. I mean just be available all the time to get totally immersed in it. And I did that because I needed that outlet at that time. And what happened was that business began to grow and grow and grow. And we had a guy came into our office one day. He was an efficiency expert. And he said, if you let me follow you around for a month, I'll be able to improve your business by 30 to 40%. And I said, wow, I'm impressed. So he said, first of all, there's some basic information. Where do you get your clients? I said, from God. He said, can you run with that? I said, yeah, I go and do something over here that's totally unrelated to what I do over here, and when I come back, it's done over here. The people in my office felt that I was coming in about half the amount of time that I had been coming in before, and the business had quadrupled. And they said, you know, Ken, we could take a big advance if you didn't come in at all. And so recognizing my talents, I said, you know, I think I'm going to come in a lot less. And so I began to do other things. And at that time, I don't know why, it's one of those intuitive thoughts. But I decided to work in the hospice field, working with people who were terminally ill. And I went and I took the course, and I went through the course. And the very first guy that I was sent out to see was an angry man about 71 years old who was dying of cancer. And they didn't take him in the hospice program unless the diagnosis was 6 months or less. So I went to this guy, and he was real angry. And I said, what are you angry about? And he said, you wouldn't understand. And I pumped him a little bit and said, come on, what are you angry about? And finally he looked me in the eye and he said, this is going to make no sense to you, but I'm a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. He said, and I have 39 years sober, and I should have taken a cake 2 months ago, and I'm just too weak to go with the medication I'm on. And I said, wow. I said, I'm 13 years sober. We didn't say wow, but I'm using wow. At the group level. I don't want somebody on the phone in New York going, that Ken said that whole letter word. So I said to him, Stanley, I said, you load up on that medication and I'll take you to a noon meeting. So I took him to a noon meeting and I gave him a 39-year cake. And God, my God, loves to do bank shots sometimes just to show off. He lived another whole year. And I got to give him a 40-year cake. Now, I have a lot of guys who call me whimpers and whiners. Ken, she's leaving. Ken, I lost my job. So I say, come on over, and we'll spend some time together. But I have that word commitment, and my commitment is I promise this guy to go there for an hour every day, and I'm going to go see him, so you come with me. So by that time, Stanley had had a colostomy, and he had a bag on his side, and he had all kinds of IVs, and his one lung was collapsed, and he was on oxygen, and I'd bring these guys in, and I'd say, Stanley, these guys are having trouble with the program. They think it's tough out there. And he'd whip that oxygen mask off. He'd say, wow, another day sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. Are we lucky or what? I mean, is God good? And he'd go until that oxygen ran out, which was about a minute and a half. And then he'd go back to huffing the oxygen, and we'd stay and we'd visit with him. And then when we'd leave and we'd get outside, I'd say, now tell me about your problems. And if you don't fit in this category, I'm not talking to you. But there's a lot of folks who do fit in this category. They're not worried about where they're going to sleep tonight. They've been sober a number of days, months, weeks, or years. They don't worry about not eating. And yet, they're not the least bit grateful for being where they're at. It's like somehow I deserve so much more. And if you fit into that category, maybe what the old timers used to say over and over again is something that bears repeating. And that is, did you ever notice that the people who are grateful are happy, joyous, and free? And those that ain't. And it's like, how much do you need? How much is enough? If the news of the last several months about some of these guys with insider trading, if it's taught anything, is that this ego business can just devour you. It doesn't make any difference who you are. It can just devour you. And here we are. We're sober members of Alcoholics Anonymous. When I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, I didn't know what my diagnosis was. But I can tell you standing here tonight very clearly what my diagnosis would have been if someone could have seen inside of me. I was suffering from spiritual malnutrition. That was my malady. I was running my whole life based on selfishness and self-centeredness. And that's spiritually malnutrition. And the deal for that is to go and work with other people and to start to live life one day at a time, one moment at a time, and do those very simple things that are talked about in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And the two things that I wanted so very desperately, which I didn't know then, but I know now, is, first of all, I wanted a reason for living. I wanted a purpose to be here on this earth. And I do have a purpose today. My primary purpose is to stay sober and to help other alcoholics who still suffer. And the second thing I wanted, which I didn't know then, but I know now, is I wanted a love affair that was so intense in its passion that it just grew and grew and grew. And you guys allowed me, through the book, the program, the fellowship, and the steps, to get in touch with the God of my understanding, where that relationship has commenced and continued for now almost 20 years. And I am most very, very grateful for all that you have done with this guy. When I arrived here, I was not the nicest guy on the block. If you saw me walking on one side of the street, you probably wouldn't come over and say hi to me. I was the guy that your mom said, don't go near him. You know, I was the guy who was carrying a gun and going to school. And there's a story in that too. 3 years ago, I was the spiritual speaker at the Sunday morning roundup in San Diego. And they get about 6,000 people to that roundup. And I was just about ready to start the meeting, as we did here tonight, by reading the steps and so forth. And the co-chair brought up a guy who said he knew me. And the last time I had seen that guy was 37 years ago. And the last time I saw him, I had a gun in his face. And he was trying to take money from me that I had collected by running book. And he was older than me by 5 or 6 years. And I had started to carry this piece in the back of my pants to protect myself from getting knocked over. And he said, wow, he said, is this program something? He said, I'm 75 days sober and you're the spiritual speaker. And I got a chance to go and give him a 1-year cake. And the night I gave him a 1-year cake, he gave his daughter a 90-day token. So there's a continuity of sobriety that goes on here that you can't see unless you come to the meetings. You can't see it sitting home watching HBO. I call it slip-o-vision, you know? Can't go to that meeting tonight, boy, there's my movie. How many times have you seen it? 6, but I'm going to watch it tonight. And I always say the same thing. I'm glad there were some people there when you came to your first meeting. And you know, folks, I don't mean to be on a soapbox about how good this program is and what it's done for me. Because if you're here any length of time, you have that experience. But we have such a simple thing here, and it's so easy to get messed up. And it gets messed up when people start thinking. If you're confused about what anybody else did to you, if you have anybody right now in your life who you feel has done you wrong in the past, just make it a point tonight to let it go. In fact, if you can, call them on the phone. Sure surprise them. And say, whatever it is with you is no longer with me. Because one of the things that I became aware of is that I laugh and joke and make a fool of myself a lot of times. And the reason I do that is because laughter is the most healing thing there is. And I know 3 things about laughter that most people don't know. That is, I never met anyone, no matter what degree you have, who can think and laugh at the same time. So if you're laughing, you're getting a break, you know? The second thing is that if you can hear yourself laughing, you say, it can't be that bad. I'm laughing. And the third thing is, most of us have forgotten how to laugh. And we need to be reminded. And don't be upset if you're the blunt of the joke. Be the blunt of the joke. If it allows someone else to get a laugh, be the blunt of a joke. I read a book one time. It's one of the few books I read in spirituality that just stayed with me real strong all of my life. And it was written by a guy by the name of John of the Cross. And John of the Cross wrote a poem in a book called The Dark Night of the Soul. And if you ever read that, you would come to the realization probably that that's what every alcoholic that I know goes through. We reach a point in life where it seems totally dark, and we're totally panicked as to what's coming up and what we're to do. And if we just hang in there, the morning comes. It's hard to tell someone that at 1 o'clock in the morning that there'll be a morning of light, but that's what you do. You hang in there. And he had a great saying, which I think is terrific for alcoholics, and that is, to get to that place you've never been, you must go away you've never gone. And if you want to get to that place where you get up in the morning and you're real happy to be alive, and you're real happy to be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and you practice that happiness all day long, you've won. And don't be worried about what you accumulate along the way. You'll always have more than you need. You'll always have more than you need. In fact, as you get further down the path, you'll find out you probably have too many things. They probably encumber you, and you probably let go of a couple of things. And you find out this isn't about accumulating anything. This is about letting go of everything. Working without a net. It's a hell of a way to go. I'm going to close with a story my mom used to tell, because it summed up all the spirituality in her life, and it always reminds me of her. And she did a whale of a job. And the deal is that she used to tell this story about Johnny, and Johnny went to a parochial school. And next to this parochial school was a church. That's just the way they did it. It's a captured audience. And she used to tell how Johnny went into that church every morning, and he knelt down and he said, "Hello, God, this is Johnny. I just want to tell you, I'm here." And then he'd boogie off to school. And he did that morning, noon, and after school. And he did it on the weekends and holidays and during summer vacations. "Hello, God, this is Johnny. I just want to tell you, I'm here." And my mom said when he was 12 or 13, he contracted polio, which at that time was terminal. And he was dying. And he was in a room with his parents and his friends and his school chums and the neighbors, and my mom said a voice was heard to say, "Hello, Johnny, this is God. I just want to tell you, I'm here." And folks, that's what this is about. Whenever anyone, anywhere reaches out, we'll be here. God bless you. Thank you very much for listening.